Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to today's webinar, What Are Funders Thinking? I am so excited to have you all here. We have an amazing group. Oh, we have an amazing group that includes lots of friends and familiar names. That's always fun. Um, for those of you I haven't met, my name's Gabe, Gabe Lerner. I am the publisher and founder of Democracy Notes. We'll give folks a little bit more time to join in, um, and then we'll dive into today's topic. By way of background, Democracy Notes is a trade publication, which means a publication for a particular sector or field. We're the trade publication for the democracy space. So we help funders, practitioners, job seekers stay up to speed on what's happening in the democracy ecosystem. My colleague Jake just dropped a link to our Substack newsletter into the chat. Got lots of philanthropy news, got lots of jobs, open roles, events. We help folks stay up to speed on reports, good data, like the data that Payson and Democracy Fund have for y'all today. We've got a great group on here. This feels like critical mass to start with our first order of business, which is actually asking you all a series of questions. Um, we're going to be getting into survey data of what funders are thinking from Amy McIsaac, Managing Director of PACE, and Robert Griffin, Associate Director of Research at Democracy Fund. But before we do, we have a few survey questions for you all on your relationships with funders. This is all anonymous. We just want to get a directional sense of what folks are experiencing. So there are four poll questions here, and excited to see what y'all have to say. And again, these are anonymous, so don't worry about sharing your candid thoughts. For those just joining, we've got a little survey going to get thoughts on folks' relationships with funders, and then we'll dive into the presentations of what funders are thinking. I got a couple questions around question two. Please tell us whether you agree or disagree with the following sentiment. And the sentiment is that bit in quotes there. My organization's funding is stable for the next 12 months. And question three, how would you rate your sentiment towards your funders right now? How are you feeling about your relationship with funders? All right. I am gonna leave this open and bring up my colleague Rob Griffin from Democracy Fund, and we'll get things going. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, and good morning, everybody. Actually, sorry, afternoon. Let me go ahead and share slides, and then we'll kind of get going here. And Gabe, is that coming through good?
Yep, looks great.
Lovely. So I'm here today to talk to everybody about a survey that Democracy Fund has been doing since September 2024. And the general idea that we had was to say, like, okay, even as a funder, we need to keep track of what's going on with funders a little more closely, right? Like technically, everybody's getting together in coalitions and meetings and conferences and webinars, and we're networking and all this other kind of stuff. But it's still really hard to know what people are thinking and what they're doing in real time. So essentially, starting in September 24, we started doing these surveys where we were actually just sending out a series of about 15, 20-minute questions to funders, right? Folks that we identified as being funders of democracy organizations. And so we are now on our third wave of this, right? So our latest being in September 2025, and I'm going to be presenting some data from all of this stuff. So a lot of this stuff is going to be past tense, and I think that's just to identify for folks that, this is data that's coming in from a little while ago. So what was the mood, right? What were funders concerned about? And at the back end of all this, I'm also going to talk about Essentially the signs and signals that at least I'm seeing and I'm hearing from people inside my organization about how things are going now. So first off, just high level, how are things going with democracy, right? Are you satisfied with the way democracy is working in the United States? And not surprisingly, essentially this number has been declining, right? People were already starting off with a pretty bad sentiment here, right? 81% saying not very satisfied or not satisfied at all. It's very close to 100% today that we're getting essentially almost nobody in our surveys, right? So this is, I think, tracking sentiments, I think, with a lot of like what we're seeing among grantees too, but essentially a decline in the amount of optimism, right? To dig in a little bit more, we essentially see that across a bunch of different items, right? I am optimistic about the future of American democracy. Fewer people agree with that today than they did in fall 2024. American democratic institutions can address emerging challenges facing the country. Fewer people will agree with that today. Not quite in the numbers that we're seeing with the satisfaction numbers, but still sort of not net positive necessarily. American democracy under threat. That is now 100% of respondents, right? We are not getting anybody who's saying that that's not a thing that's happening. And even the US democratic system is broken and in need of fundamental reform, right? We're now seeing essentially, what is that? 88% of folks expressing that sentiment. So again, this overall drop in optimism, rise in pessimism, we are seeing that reflected in a bunch of different questions that we're asking people. This holds over even when we start to ask about philanthropy specifically, right? So I am optimistic about the role of philanthropy in strengthening American democracy. That's now only 43% of respondents. These are people who are funders working at funding organizations who are thinking about this way. Philanthropy does not currently possess the strategies needed to significantly improve democracy, right? This is 60% of people who are agreeing with this idea that they don't currently possess the strategies to do this. Philanthropic efforts over the past decade have been largely unsuccessful, right? That's now about 52%. So again, a majority of people are saying, okay, this has not been going well. I think, somewhat counterintuitively, you do actually have a decent number of people saying 60% saying that it's effectively coordinated, which, to my eye, how I read this sometimes is also like coordination might just not be the choke point here, right? Like people think that there is a decent amount of coordination going on, but it is not the thing that is necessarily like, overcoming the problems, right? We are still seeing these issues. We still potentially have been unsuccessful. We still potentially don't possess the strategies needed here. Piece of good news in some ways, right, is that funders do see themselves more optimistically than they see the field as a whole, which is not surprising. You see this across a bunch of things when you survey folks. But if you ask them whether they feel prepared to act quickly and support the needs of the field, right, on democracy issues, you essentially have 80% of respondents saying, yes, my organization is actually very prepared or somewhat prepared. But then they feel kind of worse about philanthropy as a whole. So, this is just an issue in some ways where folks who were identifying, they're saying, we feel pretty good about this, but as they look out at philanthropy as a whole, they just see far less preparation over time. Maybe a little bit of increase in this last survey wave, but essentially a decline probably since the fall of 2024. What are the things that they're focusing on? And I just want to draw your eye to the question wording that's up top now, because I think it's kind of important relative to what is happening now. So this isn't saying like just rank order all of the things on this list, although sometimes people will interpret the question that way. But we're really trying to get people to say like relative to what's already happening, where should we be putting more time? Where should we be putting more attention? Where should we be putting more money? And the top three results that we see, again, in this latest wave, and it's been relatively consistent, has been countering authoritarian threats and extremism, supporting free and fair elections, and building effective governing institutions. I won't read out the whole thing, but you can kind of see them there as the top three. I think notable because it does match a lot of sort of dynamics and sort of narratives that are in the field. But one of the things we do see that has been a significant decline is building grassroots for a just society. This has been sort of one of the bigger drop-offs, unfortunately, and like fewer and fewer people identifying this as like the top thing relative to these other pieces of the puzzle. So I led up top saying like it's really hard to keep track of funders. One of the things that we are trying to identify in these surveys is to say like get out ahead of this and say like, okay, what do you know about your spending plans in the future? So when we're talking about 2026, this is generally going to be about democracy related giving. And then eventually I'm going to go into an election specific related question. But starting off, this is just about democracy sort of giving writ large. So I'd say here, again, relatively good news. We've got about three-quarters of folks saying they plan to increase or maintain their democracy-related giving in 2026 compared to 2025. So, again, before the new year, this is people already saying we're either going to increase or maintain these portfolios. That's great. To the extent that they're in our survey, we sometimes have folks who are kind of uh, represent donor networks or donor collaboratives. And the idea here is that these are kind of nodal players, right? So they're able to essentially maybe give us a wider set of attitudes and wider set of opinions about all the people that they associate with. And again, a little more uncertainty here is generally what we see, but even here, right, it's the majority of respondents are saying, yeah, 55% they're going to maintain or increase their democracy related giving. We do see a relatively significant number of people saying they're going to revisit their strategy in the coming year. So last year, they were telling us in the coming year, we are revisiting our strategy. So it's about 3 and 10. But very thankfully, again, 0% planned on pausing their giving, right? So nobody was doing this sort of hard strategy refresh where it's like we need to absolutely stop anything that we're doing. So a lot of revisiting strategy, rethinking what they're doing, maybe in line with that earlier survey question saying like maybe we don't even have the strategies to be able to do this, but nobody's sort of pausing their giving necessarily. Let's talk specifically about election-related giving, right? So these are folks who are donating, and we're asking them about their money specifically going to election-related organizations. Again, here I take relatively good news, which is as of last year, we asked people to compare what their 2026 plans were compared to 2022 and to 2024, right? So the last midterm and this last sort of general election. And, among funders and pooled funds, so the people who are respondents who are representing those kinds of institutions, we're seeing, right, 68% say that they're going to increase relative to the last midterm, and even around, what is that, 60% saying that they're going to increase even relative to 2024. So among the people who have like kind of the most information about their plans, majorities are saying we're going to maintain or increase. If you look at what's happening like among networks and advisors, again, there's more uncertainty here just because, and we kind of expect that these are these nodal people who don't necessarily know the plans of every single person in their network. But again, what we're seeing is the plurality, if not the majority response for both 2022 and 2024 is like, okay, maintain or increase, right? So we're expecting an increase or stability among a lot of these groups with, again, a decent amount of uncertainty. What are people focusing on? So we asked them essentially this question on the left, for which of the following election-related work areas does your organization do work and provide funding? And again, the top three areas that people were planning on for 2026, grassroots organizing, civic engagement, and voting rights. Maybe not surprising, but again, these are sort of the top areas. So as I kind of mentioned up top, this is again from September 2025. So we're any number of months now out from this survey. So again, as a bit of a bridging mechanism, I can kind of talk through, I think, what I have been hearing from my colleagues and folks who are doing this work. For those of you who are aware of it, Democracy Fund runs a program called All by April, where essentially we are trying to get other funders to get their money or at least the commitments to give money out the door by the end of April, right? So getting money into election organizations' hands early and getting those commitments into the sort of inboxes early. And what we're hearing from this is kind of a mixed bag, if I'm being totally honest, right? So on the one hand, we are seeing a lot of momentum, especially going in the last 2 months, right, where more and more organizations are actually meeting this commitment and are able to get the majority of their money out the door and a majority of sort of their commitments out the door early. And so that's great. And at the same time, we are also hearing about funding shortfalls, or another way to put it among some folks is like, this is a similar amount of money to what we've seen in the past, but like we are in an extraordinary moment, right? So maybe even when money is stable, maybe it's not matching the moment. And among other organizations, like, okay, there are like significant shortfalls that might be going on here. And, I think it's just sort of important sort of for everybody to continue to get the word out about this, right? Because if we are hearing this from large national organizations, right, who are often sort of the best connected, often have access to the most money, it's usually the case that downstream from them are these more state-based or local organizations who are probably facing more significant sort of funding drop-offs or having funding issues. So with that, I will just turn it back to Gabe and Amy.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was fantastic. Quick note, Amy, before passing it over to you, if you have a question, feel free to join the folks who have already dropped those questions in the Q&A function. Um, we'll get to them just right after Amy's presentation. Awesome. Over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Gabe, and thanks, Rob, for the lead in. I'm just going to share my slides real quick. One second, let me just clear my screen here. Slideshow. Okay, you guys got a paste slide?
Awesome. Yes.
Good. Okay, great. Hello, everybody. I have to say I was snooping on the participant list. Rob, I was listening, but I was also snooping on the participant list, and it was so great to see so many names that I know. Hello, Sterling, Jessica Baylor, Jen, Una. I mean, there's just so many fun people that are here today. So thanks for taking the time. I also know this webinar was titled, like, What Are Funders Thinking? I think it was called. That's a very big task. I won't be answering that full question. I can give you a slice of what we at PACE have observed to be on the minds of funders over the last couple of months. Just as a quick context for anybody who doesn't know PACE, PACE is a philanthropy serving organization. We have about 85 grant makers who are members of PACE. Some are private foundations, community foundations, corporate foundations. Some are big and giving over 50 million a year. Some are small and giving under 5 million. Some are national, some are regional, some are neighborhood level. What they all have in common is that they are in some way prioritizing strengthening free and fair democracy in the United States and civic engagement at this time. And so we learn together, we invest together, we experiment together. And one of the things that PACE does is really try to understand the pulse of philanthropy, like the circle and Venn diagram of democracy and philanthropy, what's going on in that overlap. And that's where we sit to understand. And so last year, we were hearing from our members that there was a lot of efforts emerging in the philanthropic space to help philanthropy stand up for philanthropy. There's a lot of EOs that were threatened and then were very real, and there was a lot of efforts that were helping to kind of coordinate philanthropy's response to those threats. But there was this kind of lingering question of where do we go to stand up for democracy? And so we started to really dig into that at PACE and figure out a few different ways to answer that question. But one of them was to just understand kind of where are funders right now on kind of the threats to constitutional democracy right now. How do we understand that? And are there things that they are willing to do about that? And so we put a very quick poll into the field. It was in the field in a, give or take October of 2025. Short 15 questions. We distributed it through all the channels that we had at our partnership disposal to try to move it through to get as many folks. So these are not representative of just PACE members, but foundations and grant makers beyond that. So just to give you, again, a little piece of context in terms of the demographics of who responded and engaged with the poll, in terms of the individuals themselves, you can see we're looking at responses mostly from the C-suite and the program officer vice president level. We asked respondents which description best represents how you think your funding institution is perceived by funders, by other funders. So on the political spectrum, like what do you understand your perception in the market to be? We're seeing a majority liberal, very liberal, though of course seeing some voice from the conservative side and a pretty strong moderate and nonpartisan representation as well. And then in terms of foundation type, you can see that we have over 60% that identify as family foundations and, a little over about a quarter are community foundations. This tracks with the overall arc of philanthropy. So what did they say? Like I said, we only asked 15 questions because we really wanted folks to engage and be able to do it in a quick way so we could get the temperature check. But one of the questions we asked was, what is your funding institution's perspective of the direction of democracy in the US? We were very clear to ask them to report on what they understand the mood of the institution to be versus like them as an individual. But you can see, we see very clear signals here that folks are concerned about the direction of democracy in the US. And then similar question, but slightly different that felt valuable. What is your funding institution's general sense of the current reality? Do you believe we're in crisis? Do you believe we are thriving? Very heavy on the crisis side of things. So this data maps pretty closely to what Rob was sharing as well as what is the mood of the room, so to speak, within philanthropy in the fall of 25 as we looked ahead to 26. We then asked a follow-up question of, here's a slate of issues. We offered 13. We could have offered many, many more, but these were the 13 that we thought covered a lot of the big bases. And we said, which of these issues do you think your funding institution is most willing to take action on? And that's that lighter blue bar that you see on this deck. And it's in order of the most willing. So threats to elections, clampdowns on civil society, information disorder. These are kind of the top ones emerging. Then there was a follow-up question after they answered that. Which one is your funding institution also willing to take action on? And so you see that darker blue on top. That gives us a fuller picture. So overall, looks like a lot of folks are willing and interested in taking action on clampdowns to civil society. We see kind of a bump up on independence, press independence on here as well. Really interestingly, we see none being the most also willing selection. So it seems that there is a group of philanthropy that has their thing that they're willing to take action on, but nothing else after that. So I think that's an interesting dynamic that we're seeing here too. But to give you a little more texture on the top three that rose to the top. So the first one, of course, was threats to elections. And just to be clear, the way we phrase that was threats to free, fair, competitive, and participatory elections. And we had some follow-up questions. And so I'll share kind of what we found from that. So 81% of folks who selected this as the issue that they felt their funding institution would most be willing to take action on did already have experience funding in the election space. 14 did not. Any gap there meant they didn't know. So very high percentage of people who are concerned about elections and willing to do something about it already having experience in it. We asked kind of what scale is that experience in, or how are you thinking about this issue? What scale? Very active in the national and state level, very not active in thinking about it in the local and global level. 78% of the folks who said they were most willing to work on elections said that they were open to working with other funders in doing that. And then if you're curious about what they said they were also kind of as a secondary selection interested in, you have that here. Let's move to clampdowns on civil society. This is also, the language there was also inclusive of closing of civic space. Similar rundown of facts to share, but slightly different story. So about 60% of folks here did have experience funding in this area. So less so than in the election space. 20% did not, and 20% didn't know if they did or they didn't have experience here. So a little less experience when it comes to this group. There was an even split among the people who were thinking about this issue at the national, state, and local level. Very few thinking about it at the global level. 2/3 were open to working with other funders, and here you can see the other secondary issues and the press topping that list here as well. And then the last one was information disorder. So we contextualize that to say like misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes. Where are you on this? And so we see about the same amount of experience here in terms of having the experience. 4% do not. So that means that the largest percent of funders that didn't know if they did or didn't have experience in this was with our information disorder group. Makes sense, right? It's like, I don't really know if we're doing some mis and disinformation work. Maybe we are in some of the other ways we're running our portfolios. So not a surprise there, but strong experience. Kind of the inverse in the scale that we saw in the other issues. For information disorder, people are mostly thinking about that at the local level, less at the national and state level, and very few at the global level. So I think it's interesting we see that kind of flip from what we were seeing on the other issues. 60% said that they were open to working with other funders. And kind of interestingly here, we saw 40% say after information disorder, I'm not really interested in anything else. So that might have been driving where some of that none bar was getting very high in the previous graph we looked at. There are obviously other areas that people were, but to see 40% of funders say after information disorder, that's kind of where we're focused, I think is a really interesting takeaway. So, one of the things that we were really interested in trying to understand at pace, because we know that one of the biggest factors for resilience to threats to democracy is the effectiveness of solidarity, working in coordination, working in an organized fashion to respond. And of course, also in 2025, we're watching other sectors like the legal field and the media field get picked off one by one. And so we were really interested to understand what degree is philanthropy in a headspace and open space to lock arm in arms with other funders and really respond as a field should threats arrive to their grantees or to them directly? And so, what we were trying to assess was something about funder solidarity and appetite for that. And we asked a couple of questions related to that in the survey. And I think we saw some green flags around that. And I think we saw some things that we wanted to also raise as challenges that we're observing. So, on the green flag side of things, 66% of the folks who responded to our survey overall said they were willing to work with other funders on the issues that they selected. So, two-thirds said, yeah, I'm open to that. Only 5% said they were not. So we're feeling very encouraged by the general sense of openness to work with other funders to tackle some of these big issues. We asked folks at the end of the survey to very, very optionally offer their contact information, and about a third of the folks did it voluntarily. So we take that as a sign of trust and also signal that people are really interested in working with other folks on these issues. There was 20%, so about there's 20 respondents, about 11%, who said that they didn't think their institution would take any action on any of the issues that were presented. So that earlier graph where we saw the blue lines, there was 20 folks who said actually none of these is something my institution I think would be willing to take action on. So we wanted to understand a little bit more there. Even though they said they weren't willing to take action on it, 3/4 of them were willing to work with other funders on some of them. So maybe there's a signal there around it not being, I'm not willing to drive it, but I'm willing to be kind of on the bus to be supportive. None of those folks were the folks who said they were conservative or very conservative, which I think is important to note. And most of them were corporate foundations. So just some interesting texture when you look at that group and kind of their willingness to work with folks. The barriers to solidarity I want to name here, though, like I said, we did ask, are you willing to work with folks? And while, 60 some odd percent said yes, 5% said they were not willing to work with folks. And so we had a follow-up question. Can you share a little more why? And this is the kind of themes that emerged from those. One was that there was a lot of internal dynamics that were very tense around these issues, and that they themselves didn't feel like their house was in order in a way that they could work with others. So we heard this in terms of our staff and our board are not on the same page on these issues, or, our leadership and our staff, or our leadership and the board, or the community that we work with. There was somewhere in the ecosystem a misalignment that made it hard for them to then think about partnering externally on these issues. So I think that's good to hear and understand. There was some folks who said, I'm not willing to work with others because frankly, we just finished our strategic plan, or we've been thinking in this one way and we really feel like we need to see it through. We're not opposed to other kind of new context, new information shaping this, but we are in a lane that we've worked hard to be in and we want to stay in this lane. And so we'll probably not work with others in other capacities. I think that's a fair kind of, everyone has to prioritize. So I totally get that. And then some folks naming, I've never funded in tandem with others before. And so I think we also saw some signals around just some skills, less on the will side, more on the skill side. 16% said, yeah, willing to work with people, but it depends on some things. And so we asked, okay, what does it depend on? Folks were really clear that they thought they wanted to know that the other funders at the table, if they were going to work together, towards an issue were aligned. And we didn't mean that, they didn't mean that just in terms of the strategy, but also the value system. So there was a lot of signals around trust building really need to be there as part of the process, or other ways that we can cash in on that. Folks also wanted to know that there was a big tent of funders at the table. So I don't want to know that if we're going to work on an issue, it's not like all the center right funders are doing it over here and there's center left funders over there and there's a bunch of people in the middle, that there's kind of a tent approach to working on these issues moving forward. And then this is huge. That there is belief that the action would actually make a difference. And I think that is, we can get into this later in the conversation, but I think there's a heightened, I'm sensing in some of the conversations I'm having with funders right now, a heightened sense of like, okay, we can do this, but I need to know it's going to work. And obviously nobody has a crystal ball, but there is I think a higher threshold than there has been in the past around being really clear that doing this action or putting the dollars here is going to result in X, Y, or Z. And I think we need to contend with that as a field. 20% though said, hey, if I'm going to work with others, I do have some reservations. So they said, yes, willing to, but I have reservations. And I'm really glad these people shared them, because I think even the people who said, yes, I'd work in tandem with other folks probably shared these as well. So, of course, capacity limitations. Our budget isn't any bigger. Our time isn't any more. We have capacity limitations and can't pull further. So, hear that. Thinking about, are the priorities in scope, want to make sure they are before we move forward. Again, concerns about how do we bring the board along on this. And then this last one, I really want to make sure we take a minute on. I think I've been hearing a lot in conversations about threat levels, and it's not just because I watch a lot of Survivor and Jeff Probst talks about it a lot, but threat levels in terms of how big do you make yourself, at what cost, at what time, what is it worth, what are the trade-offs? And there was just very, very clear that in the responses we were getting here, that folks really were open to increasing their threat level, wanting to know that it was worth it. But then the concern wasn't so much the retribution to themselves, but then the effect of that on their ability to support their community. So I was sensing a lot less self-interest in this and a lot more, how do we keep showing up for our community if we then are taken out or we then are targeted in a way that we can't come back from? So I think an extra layer there that was really important for us to hear. That's what I got. I'm excited to hear questions as we go along, but Gabe, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Rob. Um, we have a lot of fantastic questions in the Q&A function, including lots of enthusiasm, Amy, for Survivor. Folks want to know, the people need to know who you're rooting for in season 50. We got Survivor Gang Rise Up. But wanted to uplift a couple substantive questions as well and get your thoughts on a couple things. Um, First, process-wise, my sense is that both of your organizations are thinking about doing surveys like this again. That is why we're asking survey questions of you all, our audience, uh, and asking for your questions in the Q&A. We want some information. We want to know what you all are curious about when it comes to what funders are thinking and what their plans are. But is that right, just in terms of running these surveys again, et cetera?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, so, although at least at present, right, how we structure the survey is for democracy funders or those in networks or things like that. There are goals in the future to actually have this be more of an ecosystem survey. Again, we actually have to explore how to do stuff like that, because there are a bunch of, I won't bore everybody, you'll fall into a light coma, but there's lots of survey questions to like figure out how to actually survey a population, like the entire ecosystem of grantees. But essentially having these insights and the questions that you all are asking and what's valuable to you, incredibly useful.
I second that. Yeah, we did our survey because it felt like contexts were shifting quickly, and we wanted to make sure we were making decisions that were informed about how to support the philanthropic field. So that's why we did it then. But we we think knowing that pulse is critical, and knowing what the pulse helps you all do is secondary, is like second up there with how critical it is. So knowing that is key.
Love it. Love it. Love it. One other question about the mechanics of this. Did you all collect data on how many funders are C3 versus C4 funders?
Hmm. We did not. We did not make that distinction.
Cool.
I think we did actually collect it. There is it's usually not very informative. I guess I'd put it that way. Sometimes you can ask people about this stuff, but actually getting them to talk about their C4 funding is difficult. Let's put it that way.
That makes sense. We also got a question, is there data on what funders are funding? Um, I would give a shout out to the Democracy Hub put together
Yeah.
by Impala and Democracy Funders Network. We can drop a link to that hub in the chat. You have to register, but it's free to register. That is based on 990 data and has a great taxonomy, a great breakdown of different pockets of democracy work. We will drop the link in just a sec. I believe it goes up to 2024 990s now. Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, there'll still be some incompleteness, but a good ecosystem level view. The thing I would just say for anyone who wants to go and take a look at that is the best way to get five definitions of what democracy work is to ask two people who work in the space, right? So like you're going to see stuff in there where you're like, I don't recognize this, or I don't think about that. From what I understand, I think that's kind of by design in the place. So go in with an eye just to know that like it is a big diverse field. People have different definitions of it. You'll see stuff in there. I think sometimes that looks different from how you're thinking about it, but still very useful to get sort of a landscape level view.
Love that. Um, Amy, question for you that gets to some of the questions in the chat. Based on your interaction with funders who are members of PACE or others that you're talking to, do you have advice for folks in the grant seeking bucket?
Yeah. I do. Also, I was a fundraiser for the first 10, 12 years of my career. And so I'm going to take my PACE hat off and put on just me hat and share kind of some thoughts from a grant seeker perspective is, if I was back in my fundraising shoes, how would I think about this moment? So there's a couple things that I would point out, of course, informed by the conversations I have with funders as well. I think one is that there's a general kind of mood in the room of, I'm hesitating to say this because I feel like I felt it a lot in 2025, and I feel like maybe this has shifted a little bit in the first couple months of 26. But there's a general sense of like, what are we doing? What is everybody doing? Anyone have an answer to what we're doing? And I think where I've seen organizations from a fundraising perspective, but also in terms of a leadership perspective, really excel are the leaders and the teams that have a really strong analysis about what is happening right now, and then what we should do about it. So they are very, very effective at crafting a simple to understand and engage with story about what is happening. So what do we do about it? Um, what is happening? So what does that mean? And now what do we do about it? That arc, I think, it's never failed me. And I think I'm seeing folks who can do that really well find the partners that they need to move forward. So I think spend some time there if you don't already have a real informed sense of the analysis of the moment, and make sure it's sitting on your experience as an organization, right? Whether it's data you collect or conversations you host or the community that you organize, you have information and you have experience and foundation that grant makers want to really understand and kind of invest in. So that's one thing. The second thing I'll say is that I do think that there is a window of opportunity right now where philanthropy is concerned, right, about democracy and civic engagement in the United States. I think for a while it's been long term, but I think we have hit a fever pitch given the circumstances of the last year. One of the things I think about a lot at Pace is like, when is this window going to close? And how do we make the most of it for civil society right now? Meaning, how do we get folks to not just in the philanthropic space, not just come in to be a democracy funder for 2026 or 2028's election or whatever it is, but to really understand that this is a long-term commitment. The office of citizen means that you are always showing up. There is never a time where you put that responsibility down. And so the ways in which democracy has become a priority for folks, how do we convert that maybe short-term thinking given the moment to a long-term commitment? And I say that because I'm really noticing a long tail in philanthropy that's going untapped right now. So we get a lot of outreach from regional offices, family foundations, folks who are got sizable endowments and grant making budgets in a year who are like, what's going on? No one's talking to me. I don't know what to do. And really are looking for some guidance about how to do something to meet the moment. I think sometimes we get wrapped up on kind of where the big 10 foundations who are thinking about democracy and have for a while are on these issues. And I think we should because they're very, very informed and they've got strong, smart teams who can really give us something to lead in this moment. And I think there's a long tail that we may have not harnessed as effectively as we can. So I'm thinking a lot about that. And if I was a grant maker, I'd be thinking about, that long tail. So that's one more thing. And then the last thing I'll say is that I think that there's a lot of ways that um, we're all trying to find shortcuts right now to, are you aligned with me? Are you not aligned with me? Are we seeing things the same way? I feel it even at like holidays with my family. I will drop in just a little bit enough of a headline to see like, what am I dealing with in this family conversation? So I just would kind of urge everyone to remember that we are constantly sending out signals as organizations, right? Are we on this side of the aisle? Are we on that side of the aisle? How, to the degree to which we hold the Constitution sacred, right? So there's a lot of ways in which signals are being sent. And the words that are on our website, the words we use in outreach emails, the words that we use in webinars and on podcasts that then funders find us on, I think are important that we're trying to be as thoughtful and responsible in how bridgy we are in that communication as possible. So this is a soft plug for PACE's Civic Language Project as a tool if you are looking for support in how to talk in a way that folks across aisles will stay in the conversation with you. But I would just say, I know that funders are looking for are these people on my side of understanding the context of the moment? Are we in the same reality? Are we not? And so making sure that your language and your kind of external presentation is bridgy is going to increase your chances of funders coming and seeing you as a partner.
Yeah,
That is,
oh,
yeah, Rob, all you.
if I could just plus one, I think one of the things Amy is saying, and just sort of put a finer point on it, which is just to say it's really useful to understand how there's been a change in the demographics of who's a funder, right? And I don't mean that necessarily in a racial or age-based way, but just sort of like you have some folks who have been in the space a long time who are one also grappling with, I think, obviously a very threatening moment, but themselves have some expertise and some background in this occasionally from having worked on it a decent amount of time. And then you really do have a large number of people who are coming to this space sometimes for the first time and they have traditional pools of giving. Maybe it's geographically based, maybe it's topically based, and they are trying to draw the connective tissue between those types of expertise that they have and their understanding of the world and how to meet this moment. And you all can sometimes usefully be a bridge there with, I think, as Amy kind of mentioned, just a strong analysis of the moment and a strong story, right? As a funder, we also think about this. Like we think about there are people who are coming into the space and they need information and guidance, and there's a little bit of mentorship that you do as they come into a space. It also happens from grantees as well, as they help them sort of understand a space and understand how maybe the traditional areas of work that they have been in actually translate over to this new thing.
Mhm. That's incredibly helpful. Rob, question for you, double clicking into one of the items on one of your slides.
Sure.
Can we discuss, this is from someone in the Q&A, can we discuss the apparent big drop in support for media and information ecosystems? Drop of 13% is a big downward pivot. Any hypotheses around that swing downwards?
I don't have strong, so it's not my topic area. I don't work on it. Just so everyone knows here, I'm not a program officer. I'm a researcher who works kind of within Democracy Fund. And also in some ways I am not speaking for Democracy Fund. So note that in any response I have. But just to say, like, we've clocked it. It's quite possible that that is a reaction to the moment, to be totally honest, right? That like in a point in time where birthright citizenship is suddenly on the table and we are hearing Supreme Court cases about that. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's just a world where people are kind of reordering some of this stuff a little bit in terms of their responses. I don't have the strongest sense that that downstream has really had a huge impact on funding yet, right? One of the ways that I think about a lot of trends within philanthropy is like if you see people saying stuff today, it really is sometimes 12 to 24 months before you start to see this stuff play out elsewhere. That's not 100% true, but just to say that like philanthropy, it's a big boat. It doesn't turn very quickly. A lot of this stuff kind of has long sort of tails and sort of getting implemented even once people know that they kind of want to do something different. So just to say, like, I too am grappling with that and just wondering, up to and including as a methodologist, saying like this could just be survey error, and maybe next time I run the survey, like it bounces back, right? And the truth is that I actually just don't know.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I don't have a good sense of it either. My instinct is to turn to media impact funders and see kind of what they're seeing in their
Mhm.
community as trends. They're kind of our peer on that side of things. But I don't have that analysis right now, but really good flag, Michael.
Amy, a question for you. What do you think funders are imagining when they consider the question about working with other funders? There's so many possibilities. So working together with different levels of commitment. What might that look like?
Yeah. I think it's a few things. I think that there's um we've been thinking a lot about what does joint action among philanthropy look like, and really like what are the tools that philanthropy has in its control to even bring to that table. And of course, there's the dollars. So to the question at hand, I'd say there's a way in which it's co-investment, but then it's also co-speaking out. It is ways in which there is kind of portfolio, like how do we help the ecosystem across our portfolios collaborate more effectively? Um, when we were asking the question, it was really around the topics and the issues. So let's take threats for around elections. Like, would you be willing to work with other funders on this topic? And I think there also opens up a world of possibilities, when it comes to elections itself. The shortest answer is I think we're talking co-investment or some way of like co-influencing the space, whether that's voice or writings or kind of the ways that portfolios would work in tandem.
That makes a ton of sense. Um, are someone asked a question that gets to the heart of one of the trends in Democracy Notes 2025 Trends Report, which is about firefighters and construction workers. This uh, set of work focused on defense, focused on rapid response in the firefighting camp, and a set of work focused on longer term solutions, longer term building. Is there a sense of how many funders are thinking about strengthening and renovating strategies versus near term protecting strategies?
I don't have a good pulse on that. I think I can anecdotally think of members who are in one camp, another camp, shifting between camps, but I don't have a good field level pulse on that. I don't know, Rob, do you?
Yeah, I mean, let's even make lay bare the uncertainty around which I think if you were to ask people that question about their own funding organization that they work at, they
Mhm.
would give you confused answers at times. Just to say that, like, I think everyone is carrying both of those instincts. A lot of times you are seeing both of them show up in their strategies. And just to be honest, in the moment, it feels really hard to know how to make trade-offs between the two. Because again, like there are these real moments of like the house is on fire type of stuff going on, and sometimes doing these long, deep think, long-term strategy plays. It can feel it's a really hard trade-off to make. And again, I think every single organization is not just grappling with that right now in this moment. They're going to keep it's going to be a perpetual thing, at least in my head, for the next couple of years. There's no way out of that grapple.
Yeah, an ongoing tension, ongoing wrestling there. Um, what has changed? So it's been a couple months since both of these surveys were in the field. Um, I know you don't yet have hard data on this, but anecdotally, based on conversations you've had, things that you've heard from your colleagues, do you have a sense of where things are moving on some of these axes since the surveys went out?
I can take a first jab at that. I mean, I I'm not sensing quite I think the stakes still continue to feel very, very high. I think there is more of I think there's more hope than there was,
Mhm.
6 months ago. I think one of the things I've been really encouraged in the conversations I've had is um, the sense of like Americans are doing it. Like they're doing it. Like they're mobilizing. They're the ones, they're doing it, right? How do we be better enablers of the right doing right now? And so kind of a positionality clarification, I think, in the space, which is interesting to see. Um, yeah, so I think that there's more kind of like, okay, let's get to it. One of the things that we didn't talk about yet, but I wanted to make sure it's part of this conversation, and I am really curious to hear from the 318 of you who are still with us, about kind of the way in which post 2024 the funding kind of relationships that you had. So one of the things we hear anecdotally, and I mostly want to check this, so we'll figure out a way to survey you all after this because that's what Rob and I do. But we were hearing very anecdotally that after the 24 election, there was a little bit of a like cool off in philanthropy of like, oh man, it's not like if I believe in democracy, constitutional democracy in the United States, like it's not going in that direction. And I'm not sure if this is working. Like I'm not sure if this is where my dollars should go and should stay. And maybe I could be more effective in other spaces. And so again, anecdotally, but we were hearing that. And one of the things we're really thinking about at pace going into a high stakes election like the 26 midterm elections we have ahead of us, and of course the 28 presidential election, is like how elections are signals, right? They are a report card on where we are as a country, how much our citizens are showing up, where they are, how they feel about issues. What we don't want them to be is this place where then people are like, and I'm out, right? Philanthropy is like, it's not working anymore. And so I'm going to put my dollars elsewhere. We want folks to feel really in the game long term. And so I think that is a little bit different in this year, Gabe, to your question, is I think in 25 we were still feeling a little of the like exhale, I don't know if I should come back on the field. And now in 26, I feel like people are coming back on the field. And I'm feeling a different kind of like, I needed a minute to get my head together, but let's get at it. So that feels very encouraging too. Rob, what are you sensing?
Yeah, and I won't try to pretend to speak for the entire field or anything else like that, but I will give you my own sense of it and my sense of those sometimes around me, which is, one, I think just a plus one, Amy's sentiment around the American people showing up, right? That has happened in a real way, and it was not a foregone conclusion that it would, and we are living in a better timeline because it did happen. And two, that, sometimes authoritarian people who are engaged in authoritarian overreach are their own worst enemies. They create their own problems and they sow the seeds of their own downfall. And that, essentially you have a year here where the American people are showing up and parts of American institutions are kind of holding their ground or at least acting as crumple zones, I think, for authoritarian overreach, in a way that I think, especially in, let's say, mid 2025, did not feel as certain. So again, if I were to survey again today, I'd say people would probably still deeply be in the camp of like we are in a dangerous moment, but that things have probably held a little bit more than they would have thought.
Mm-hmm. One person in the chat said, yes, that cool off of funding from roughly December 2024 to June 2025 was absolutely what my client orgs experienced. So plus one to there having been a bit of a slowdown or a cooling off there. Um, we have a bunch more amazing questions in Q&A. They are still coming in. But Amy, you teed this survey question up really, really well. We would love to get the folks on this Zoom's input on what information would be most useful to you in these surveys in the future. So I'm going to launch another survey question. Would love folks' responses. Like, what do you wish folks had surveyed on? What do you wish we had seen? And we'll try to bring some of that into this conversation as well. We're going to give folks just a minute, a couple minutes to write some responses there. And then we have until 15 minutes past the hour. So we'll get to more of your questions in the Q&A as well. while folks are typing out responses, we had a great question about burnout and turnover that I want to get to. So we'll tee that one up for a little while from now. Awesome. Okay, we'll leave this question open. Please keep typing, share those responses, share that feedback. Um, but we have this question. I wonder if you heard anything about burnout and turnover within institutional philanthropy and how that impacts relationships and giving. And just want to anecdotally share, we did this set of Democracy Notes did this set of interviews for our 2025 trends report. Burnout was one of our trends, but we've mostly talked about burnout since then at grantee organizations, at field organizations. We did in those interviews also hear from funders who themselves were feeling quite burnt out. So plus one that is something that at least anecdotally is popping up on my radar. But Amy, Rob, how does that track for y'all?
Yeah, I definitely, that was not a surprise finding in your report. And I know you interviewed folks in the funding space, folks in the nonprofit leadership space. So I'm sure it came up across all different types of interviewees. I will say, I'm thinking, I hear more about funders being worried about their grantees' burnout. I'm sensing less about like funders worried about their own burnout, though, there's always a watchful eye for that. But definitely our grantees, especially as the threats get really high for certain groups and certain communities. So, yeah, I think that I've been a part of just a couple conversations where I'm hearing like, what is the well-being plan for our grantees this year? How do we think about resources in that way? I think it's very, very early thinking for some folks, but very encouraging direction I'm starting to hear in terms of the culture approach there.
Yeah, and I would just say like it's important to like level set on this and just to plus one what Amy said, like grantee wellness and grantee burnout is going to be on the radar first, and it's going to be a bigger priority. The first rule of communications working at a foundation is that millionaires and billionaires are never the victim, nor are the people who work for them. That is not a way to live in the world. But it is also the case that yeah, burnout is real, right? And it's a real thing, right? You have not a fake sense of urgency, right? A real sense of urgency around what people are doing, and they are trying to do their best in this moment in difficult situations, and also in ones in which, like, again, backed up from the threats that grantees, like, again, grantee safety and everything else comes first. But there was a mood in the air where essentially the threats to philanthropic organizations themselves, the entire structure of them, the funding, whether it be congressional investigations, this is a real, again, less so now, but like it was a real thing that was in the air. And was not a small amount of time that places had to spend thinking about these types of things, not just for themselves, but for all their grantees as well. So I think just to tap into it too, but like the impacts on relationships and givings, right? Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of the time, I really think about two things when it comes to burnout. One is this has got to be a relay race. And you know what I mean? Like it has got to be the case that people in the institutional side of funding are building teams that are cohesive enough that you can pass off work. And sometimes, right, for a season, you do this type of work. And then maybe if you need to go and do work elsewhere. But that really the teams that are operating this stuff are robust enough that it's not going to be the worst day for a grantee, right? This is a nightmare sometimes. Like my grant officer is leaving the person I have a personal relationship with. And it's a failing, I think, sometimes of institutional philanthropy to not have robust enough teams with a robust enough understanding that one person changing a role becomes like the problem for an organization suddenly getting funding.
Great anecdote about that from the question asker in the chat. From Erica, anecdotally, we have experienced lots of turnover at foundations in the last 1 to 2 years, which sets back relationships between funders and organizations, raising this not as finger pointing, but as a pain point in moving resources.
Totally.
What what if anything surprised each of you from what your survey results turned up? Did
Hmm.
anything jump out as, oh, didn't expect that. That was interesting.
Hmm. I mean, that 0% on Rob's survey surprised me. That's not my survey, but that one was surprising, and I was glad to see it. Yeah, I have to say from my end, I can't say I'm looking at my looking at my slides right now. I'm like, huh, I haven't been asked that question. I don't think too much surprised me. I think probably the most surprising thing was that only 5% of the folks we surveyed said they wouldn't probably be in a position to work with others. That's such a
Mm.
low percent. I'm like, that's great news. So in a world where working together we know makes a difference in terms of resilience. So I was surprised and encouraged by that. And I think I got a lot of there's obviously a lot of ways to interpret the data, but I think I left our survey and felt very, very encouraged that there is a lot more to work with than some of the larger narratives might have been feeling in the fall of 25.
Yeah, if I were to name a surprise from my own survey, I think it would be the degree of pessimism about philanthropy's role in democracy,
Mm.
right? That and again, September 2025, I think you have to read it in that moment. But I think it was people really grappling, and Gabe, we've had this discussion before, but like you have a field in some ways that, look over the last decade, there's more organizations and more money working on these issues than there has ever been, and things feel like they're getting worse. And that I think that summons within people a real moment of reckoning and like, okay, like what is the solution set here? How are we actually approaching this if like suddenly more orgs, more money, more staff across the board is just not answering the call in this moment. So I think that's just again just a surprise amount about pessimism. If I had to say from Amy's survey, I would actually tap into that same number about the number of people who want to collaborate. And what that says to me in some ways, because like again, funder collaboration it sometimes can be really tough. Is just to say like willingness is not the choke point, right? So like we really start to have to think about these different career incentives and structural incentives and all the other sort of roadblocks that might be in the way if we see a lot of value to essentially the field and the ecosystem that would come from higher levels of funder collaboration.
Love that. Love that. Love that. Um, I also wanted to give a quick shout out to the folks. There have been a lot of questions, you know, uh, along the lines of, as a new organization, as an organization in this type of work, how do we get on funders' radar? Um, what I'm reading there is a gap. Maybe we could do some sort of office hours thing with funders, or maybe we could do some sort of office thing with folks who are in the development seat and have been in the democracy space for a long time to give the opportunity for more of an interactive Q&A. Okay, I saw a big yes, please in Q&A around that. Because I think these findings can only speak to those questions to some degree, and sort of the more personalized element is probably more useful information for some folks to get, but goes beyond the scope of some of these surveys. Um, okay, we have had a very, very, very robust conversation here. We will share the links to um, the resources that y'all have shared out in a follow-up email. We will um, look through what y'all shared as questions, as responses to our survey questions, and we're really curious to dig in and digest, okay, how can we inform future surveys? How can we make those better? How can we get you information that you need to do your jobs well? So I want to give everyone a huge thank you. Big thank you, Rob. Big thank you, Amy. Um, Shout out to the folks who collaborated with you on this research. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Thank you,
having
Gabe.
us, game. And I have to just say before I go, for my
Do
surviving
it.
fans, I I want Devon's to win. I think D is going to win. That's what I have to say. Don't come at me, but also you can email me if you've got thoughts. Good to be with
For the
everyone.
Survivor, we got to have a separate Democracy
Yeah,
and Survivor event after this.
I'm into it.
Um, Also, quick plug, there is a survey at the end of this once you close out of the webinar asking you a couple questions. We'd love your feedback. Would love to hear how this was for y'all. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.